So today is the 10th of Cheshvan, the 11th of November, 11/11/2024. So we're in chapter 28. We're beginning chapter 28. So we're still trying to understand again Yichud Ha'ila, Yichud Ha'tata, the higher unification, lower unification, and the difference between them. And we basically understood most of it, and the main gist of it was, just to sum up, because now we're starting a new topic. It's still the same topic, the subtopic in it. The summary was that Yichud Ha'ila is where the feeling is one of having come from Hashem entirely, so there's complete self-nullification. Yichud Ha'tata, lower unification, means that even though I don't feel my origin, I don't know where I came from, I don't know where my life force is from, it just seems to me to come out of nowhere, I still nullify myself to Hashem. So two types of nullification, they're different, and the first approximation was, or the first application, it's not called the approximation, first application was that this is, we're not in Zach, we're in 28.
28.
Yeah, we did two things in 27 and we finished in a certain sense. What? Ken. We said the two main things in 27. And so, the first application was, this is the difference between emanation and the three lower worlds, between Atzilut and Bria Yetzirah Asiyah. And now, he mentioned Ak in the previous chapter, and now he wants to say, wait a minute, it's not just that. It's not just that Yichud Ha'ila, Yichud Ha'tata is only applicable to the difference between Atzilus and Bia, between the emanation and three lower worlds. It's also applicable in many other places. And now he's going to tell us it's also applicable when we're talking about Ak, Adam Kadmon, primordial man, the first emanation that Hashem gave. Meaning that this is a higher level of distinguishing between higher unification and lower unification. That's what he wants to say. And what is premise? V'nei lavin ma shekatuv la'il shegam ak nikra bria yesh mi'ayin. So he says, even primordial man, we mentioned this, in the Zohar is called Adam de Bria, the man of creation. If you say Bria, we said Bria means, creation means something from non-being, from something I can't. So even Ak doesn't know his origin. So even Ak can do lower unification, even though he's supposed to be entirely an emanation from Hashem's will, entirely. So what does this mean? Really, after the second time, there's a whole question: how many times do you need to see something to realize that it's a rule? You need 2 times or 3 times. So since it's the second time, and we already know he's going to say that Ak also doesn't know his origin, really. So you can begin to understand that really this is all relative. Everything here is relative. There's no absolutes in the world of Kabbalah, in the world of Chassidus even. There's no absolutes. One of the biggest problems that people have with learning these types of material is they're looking for absolute definitions. The structure is absolute, but the application is relative, meaning you can apply it at any level. That's one of the things I remember. I still remember to this day where I was and what I was doing. The moment, the day I understood in the 6th grade what a variable was. Until then, I had everything as absolutes. X is a number. Okay, which number? I couldn't understand yet. It didn't click in my mind yet that when you say any number, it can take on any number. It's relative. So you take the equation x plus 3. So it depends what you put in x. It's relative to whatever you put in x. There's a moment you understand this. The same thing is true about Chassidus and Kabbalah. Except here it's not what you put into it, it's rather where do you apply it. And you can apply it anywhere. And when you apply it in different places, the structure remains basically the same, pretty absolute. But the relationship between the parts in the structure changes, because now they were like variables that are now pointing in a different place. So I take this whole definition, this whole difference between higher unification, lower unification, and apply it to Ak, to primordial man. So he now becomes the lower unification. And then I ask, so who's his higher unification? Who's above him? Who's the one who knows better than him where he came from? And the truth is, I can do that to whoever I then recognize as being Aksa origin. Here he's going to say, Aksa origin is the Ein Sof, is the light before the contraction, the first contraction. Ak is after the first contraction. But the truth is, anywhere I put it, it doesn't matter. I'll still have the same structure, which is valid, and helps me explain the relationship between things. So this is probably the most important principle of all of Kabbalah and Chassidus. It's probably the most important principle in all thought.
The fractals also.
Right, fractals are the same way. Everything, the whole world is built the same way.
It's holistic.
That's why the Rebbe, we were talking yesterday after davening, that's why the Rebbe didn't like Einstein. He did not like Einstein because of his eyes or because of his, he said, you can't say anything is absolute. To say that the speed of light is absolute and to build your whole theory around it doesn't work. Why did Einstein do that? Because he had to have some frame of reference. He wanted there to be. So there was. We were talking yesterday that there was a competing theory at the same time by Henri Poincaré. He was a French physicist. But unfortunately, he passed away in 1905 or 1906, something like that. And that was when relativity was being formed. It wasn't yet general relativity, it was special relativity still. But he didn't get a chance to fully formulate it. But the Rebbe is for Poincaré. He thinks that he's right. Why? Because Poincaré didn't accept the absolutes. He said, there's no absolutes. What are you talking about?
The theory is called relativity.
Right. Why you got relativity theory? To call it relativity is the biggest misnomer in all of science, because it's the last thing that's relative. Why? Because what's it doing? It's saying there's something that's absolute, and after that, everything's relative. That's not relativistic. So that's a deep criticism of relativity already that we're not going to get into. But you have to understand that this is how you need to think. You have to learn how to think this way. You have to learn the structure, and once you've learned the structure, then you can apply it in different places. So really, that's what Kabbalah and Chassidus are about. It's understanding structure. It's the same way that a person who studied architecture, or not architecture, let's say the Mandes Binyan, who's a Mandes Binyan, contractor, the guy who signs the plans. So he doesn't care if you build your house 80 foot wide or 80 foot high. It doesn't matter for him. The same principles still apply. He's still going to either approve the plans or not approve the plans based on the same calculations he's going to make and see if the structure can stand. So it's the same way here. Okay? So, but we benefit from this because this is what it means. Let's just say something more. Again, this whole thing, this whole book, this little book inside the book, Shorish Mitzvah Tefillah within Derech Mitzvosecha, is a book about how to meditate, how to contemplate during davening. So what are you supposed to contemplate? You're supposed to contemplate your life or what you learned. And it changes from day to day. So what you need to learn is the structure. Once you've learned the structure, you know how to analyze anything. So you analyze your day, you analyze what you learned that day, and so on. There's a competing book to this, by the way, that we're not learning. It's called Shara Yichud, from his father-in-law. His father-in-law was the middle Rebbe, Dovber. And he wrote his own version of this. It's called Shara Yichud. And one has to say that he's much more structured, 100 times more structured. But he's not as structured as the commentaries on him. There's a commentary on him by Reb Hillel of Parich, which is even more structured. And it's a question, what do you like? Do you like structure or do you like content? So the Tzemach Tzedek is more content. He's more talking about, okay, how does this apply and where does it work and what do you feel and philosophy and this and that. The Middle Rebbe doesn't care so much for that. That's why people don't learn it as much. It's considered to be much harder. But if you're a mathematical mind, you prefer the Shara Yichud to Shorish Mitzvah Tefillah, because the Shara Yichud is much more structured. Okay, in any case, so now we come to a very important. So he was more like the Tzemach Tzedek. And the Rebbe, interestingly, our Rebbe, he thought that Reb Aaron was very practical today, because he's even more emotional than the Tzemach Tzedek. And he said people today, if you don't give them stories, if you don't give them something to connect to, they don't care for structure. They're not interested. So you have to give them that. Okay, it's a whole discussion within Chabad about what to learn. So anyway, we're learning the middle ground, which is the Tzemach Tzedek. So he says, since in the Zohar, primordial man, which is the first emanation after the first contraction, is called Bria, it's called creation, the man of creation. So he must be Yesh Me'ayin also. So he must be something from nothing also, meaning he also doesn't recognize his origin. וכמבואר בכתבי האריז"ל שהאק נקרא אדם דבריאה דלכאורה תמוה, הלא אפילו כלים ד10 ספירות דאצילות הם אלוקות ממש, כמאמר איהו וגרמוי אחד. And this is very hard to say. Okay? How can you call him Bria? Because even in Atzilus we said, the vessels of the Sfirot in Atzilus, they're called godly. So how can Ak be something from nothing? Meaning, when you say something is godly, you mean that godliness is projected. They understand their origin. To be godly means to understand your origin, that you came from God. So how can you say this about Ak, that he is much, much higher, right? What's the order of the worlds? We have emanation, creation, formation, and action. But above all this is Ak, primordial man. So he is higher than emanation. We said before emanation already is completely nullified in God. It's completely godly. So how can you now say that Ak is not? כמו שכתב הרמב"ם שהוא היודע והוא הדעה הכל אחד. What does this have anything to do with this? Because he says, in the Zohar it says, Iu v'gormo yichad beon. It says about the vessels of the world, the sfirot of the world of emanation, that they, meaning the light in them, and the vessel are one thing. What does it mean they're one thing? How are you going to say something is one thing? So it says the equivalent in philosophy is what Maimonides said, that he is the knower, and he is the known, and he is the power of knowing. And all three things are one thing, and you can't separate it, and it's impossible for the mind to understand it. What's he talking about? He says, remember we talked about intention. When I think of a triangle, I now have I'm intending a triangle, meaning I have that triangle in my mind. But when I go to sleep, I don't have the triangle in my mind. Or when I switch from a triangle to a circle, where does the triangle go? So the assumption in philosophy is that these things that I intend, that I have intention of in my mind, they're not me. I take them from somewhere. We all take them from somewhere. They're ideas. So they're separate from me. What about Hashem? So he says, by Hashem, it's not that way. Says the Rambam, by Hashem, he and what he knows and his power of knowing are all one thing. You can't separate them. It's not like Hashem can go to sleep at some point and forget about the triangles he thought about. Or that you can go to sleep and forget about me and you. Which begs the question, how could Hashem, like in our Parsha, not know what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah? That it says that he had to come down, as it were. The answer, a short answer is, because there's a difference between knowing something and identifying with something. So we usually explain that when he comes down, what we mean is that he wants to see it from the perspective of the creature. Of the creatures here, from our perspective. Meaning he sees it from his perspective, it's always in front of him, it's never lost, it's never not intended, it's never not in his intention, it's always there, but he's not necessarily seeing it from my point of view. And when he comes down, that means that he's seeing it from my point of view. So that's what it says, that he came down in order to see what was the experience from the human perspective like of being in Sodom and Gomorrah. And he didn't want to judge until then. What's the analogy? That you have a judge, and he's trying a case, but he doesn't know what the person he's trying is like. So he has to do a social. He takes a psychologist or a psychiatrist, who supposedly goes into the person's kishkas to understand what type of person he is. In Hebrew they call it skira chevratit. I don't remember, they have a name for it. It's like a review. It's like a psychological review, and he gets a brief about it, and then he decides if to be lenient or not lenient, because now he's seeing things from the guy's perspective. He had a tough life, he had this, he had that, who knows? Yeah, we don't know. So that's like Hashem coming down and saying, okay, so what's it like from your perspective? From my perspective, yeah, I want to destroy you. You're guilty as anything. But from your perspective, maybe there's a leniency. Yeah. The same thing is that the soul comes up every night. Why does it have to go up every night? To give some of our perspective. Our perspective is different. So Hashem may look at it and say, the guy is guilty. But the soul says, but they were mitigating her circumstances. This you don't see how we felt all day.
But he's omniscient.
What?
We have an omniscient God.
Right, omniscient of the like intention of attention is not the feeling. The feeling you have to share.
It's very adin what you're saying.